this is Mr. Ayton. This is session 1 of Apologetics. We're going to be talking about presuppositional apologetics. Again, this is Robert Ayton, and check out my website, MrAyton.com, as well as my YouTube channel. And let's get to some presuppositional apologetics. Now, the first question is what is apologetics? In 1 Peter 3:15, Peter says, "But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is within you, but with gentleness and respect." And that word to make a defense is the Greek word apologion. Apologion. It comes from the Greek word apologia, which means apologetics, an apology. So Peter is telling us as Christians to be ready to make an apology, a defense. And that doesn't mean that we say we're sorry for being Christians. That means we are going to make a claim and a reasonable reason to defend the faith of Christianity. And this is for all Christians, not just pastors, not just deacons and elders and people, bigger high-ups in the church. This is for every Christian. It's a command to be ready to make a defense, an apologia, to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is within you, but with gentleness and respect. So in this entire series, we're going to be taking a look at how do we defend the Christian faith? How do we do apologetics properly? Well, the first thing is we have to have a worldview and understanding of the triune God. The triune God of Scripture is a necessary precondition for everything. He and his revealed revelation is the ultimate standard for everything, which means neutrality is a myth. And apart from the triune God, not a God, but the God, we would know nothing. We would have no coherent foundation for something called epistemology. We'll go into what epistemology is. That's basically how do you know what you know? Morality, ethics, principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong, experimental science, what we're doing in my courses, induction, the principle of induction, a worldview. Everything is incoherent apart from the triune God of Scripture. Now, the big question is why not use evidence to prove God's existence? There's two flavors of apologetics. One is presuppositional apologetics, which is what I'm going to describe for you here, and the other is evidential apologetics. The majority of the people that you would read, you would get their books in Christian books on Amazon that are big, go to the big conferences. They are evidentialists. They give an evidential approach to apologetics. They say there's enough evidence to have a reasonable reason to believe in God. So why not use an evidential approach? Why are we using a presuppositional approach? And the big thing is this: if the evidence of design proves the triune God, then the evidence of design is God. The evidence of design does not prove God. Nothing proves the triune God. He is. It's a very fine distinction to understand, is that if something proves that God exists, the true God, then that something becomes God. That something is the standard, the ultimate standard, but that is not true. That's not the way Scripture reveals it. Scripture reveals the triune God exists. Therefore, he reveals his evidence of design. It's a very subtle distinction, but it is a very important distinction to understand the defense of the Christian faith. So every evidential apologist that tries to defend Christianity with evidence has just destroyed Christianity. So we're not going to go that way. We're going to go with what's called presuppositional apologetics. There's a second reason why we don't use evidence to prove God's existence. It's because if you present evidence to the unbeliever, then you're allowing the unbeliever to be judge over God. You're putting God on the dock, God on the stand, and you're going to the unbeliever who is not neutral and going, okay, you rule upon God. And the amazing thing is this is futility. This is absolute futility. The creator should not be put on the dock and be judged by the creature while using the creator's knowledge, logic, air, everything else that is his. Think about how futile that is. Is you as when the apologist gives evidence to the unbeliever and says, okay, now you decide whether God exists, that you're giving the creature dominion over the creator, while the creature is using God's knowledge, logic, air, everything there. And the other thing is the unbeliever is not going to come neutral to this point of view. They're not going to come as a juror who can compartmentalize, that can be objective. All the unbeliever will do is suppress the truth and unrighteousness. And that's what Paul says in Romans 1:18 to 19, is these people suppress the truth in unrighteousness because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. It's not a lack of evidence. It is that the unbeliever is not neutral. And the third thing is that God has spoken. This is the most important, is that God has actually spoken. He says, I am, ego, eimi. He is the ultimate standard, and outside of him, you can know nothing. He is transcendental. He is objective. It's outside of us. We have a relational epistemology, which means it is given to us through Scripture, and he has actually spoken. When Moses goes to God and says, what kind of evidence do I give you, when they ask, who sent me? When he goes to Pharaoh. And God doesn't go, well, tell him X, Y, Z, all this evidence. He says, no. He says, I am. I am. And Jesus calls himself the great I am. And so the triune God and his attributes are the ultimate foundation. And it gives us a justification for the preconditions necessary for all of these things. The triune God is the God. It's not the evidence. It's the triune God is the God. And he is the preconditions before. You have to have all of these things before you do anything in life, to have any justification, to have any foundation for intelligible experience, human value and dignity, laws of logic, experimental science, uniformity in nature, laws of morality and ethics. You can't know any of these things without having a foundation, or it will be incoherent. And we will describe all of that throughout these sessions together. And so presuppositional apologetics are not only biblical, but they're logical as well. And so in any apologetic encounter, we must ask ourselves and the person we are talking to, is what we believe consistent with what we're standing upon? If what you're standing upon can make sense out of your living, your moving, your breathing, everything, your thinking, then it is consistent. And the only way to do that is having a biblical foundation of the triune God. Or is the person being arbitrary? Is it simply their opinion? Are they just being subjective? Are they being inconsistent? And so the question that I like to ask unbelievers when I have apologetic encounters is, so what? If they say the murder of Jews is wrong under your worldview, so what? If they say rape is absolutely wrong, we ask, under your worldview, so what? What someone believes must comport and be able to be justified by their worldview. And so we are the only ones that have, the Christian and a biblical worldview is the only ones that have something that is consistent and coherent. Let me give you a quote from Dr. William Provine, the late Dr. William Provine. He was the professor of biological sciences from Cornell University. This is what he said from an unbeliever's worldview. He said, there is no life after death. When I die, I'm absolutely certain that I am going to be dead. That's the end for me. There's no ultimate foundation for ethics. There's no ultimate meaning for life. There's no free will for humans. There's nothing. That is the unbeliever's worldview. That is the consistency of what they stand upon. But the biblical Christian does not stand upon that. They have distinct and meaningful justifications or warrants for appeal to everything. We have a meaningful justification and a warrant to appeal for the uniformity of nature. What is the uniformity of nature? This is the principle that states that the future will be like the past. That's how we do any scientific experiment. That's how you live life, is the future will be like the past. All inference, all experimental science, all mathematics, all language is fundamentally based in the uniformity of nature. Bertrand Russell, an atheist, stated in his 1812 work of Problems of Philosophy that you cannot appeal to past experience to show that there's going to be a uniformity in nature. You can't say that the future is going to be like the past because I experienced it before. He said that's circular reasoning, which means only biblical Christians have a meaningful justification here. We also have meaningful justification for the laws of logic. Laws like the law of non-contradiction. These are foundational, again, to experimental science, conversation, social laws, mathematics, anything you will engage in life. Even this video is using the laws of logic. We have to have a precondition for that intelligibility, and they are based upon the character of God. These are universal, unchanging, immaterial. They're objective outside of us, and only biblical Christians have a justification for the preconditions of intelligibility for the laws of logic. And lastly, ethics and morality, human value, dignity, purpose, worth. These are foundationally based in the image of God. Only biblical Christians have a justification for this all. Which means you may ask, doesn't an unbeliever, a non-Christian, don't they do science? Don't they do mathematics? Don't they use logic? Don't they believe the future will be like the past? Can't they be moral? Can't they be ethical? Do you need the God of the Bible to do these things, to believe these things, to live these things? First of all, yes. Yes, an unbeliever can do these things. An unbeliever can do science, mathematics, can use laws of logic. They do all the time. But the problem is they're stealing from our worldview. They're stealing from the biblical worldview. In fact, what they're doing is they're living on borrowed capital. They're borrowing from the biblical worldview to do any scientific experiment, any math problem, carry on any conversation, engage in any argumentation, to love thy neighbor. They're stealing from the biblical worldview because they're made in the image of God. Second of all, yes, they can do all these things, but they're living inconsistent with their worldview, which in fact shows the futility of their worldview. Their worldview does not comport with reality, nor give a justification for their actions or beliefs. And that's session 1 for apologetics. That's presuppositional apologetics. Check out the other videos of all the apologetic videos on my YouTube channel. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.